Wow, thank you, Pier Paolo. That really brings it home, doesn't it? So a very tangible example close to home. Okay, we've got time for some questions, so I'll ask the other speakers to come back up onto the stage. Ben, Roderick, Valerie, I think there's enough seats, yep. So think of your questions. I'm sure you've got some burning away. Young people first. I'm going to choose a young person first. And I think we'll just go straight into the questions, given we've got 20 minutes. I was going to ask them some tricky questions first, but you heard enough from me. So, yeah, we've got microphones. Flo or someone, are you a rover? All right. Who would like to get the ball rolling? It can be to the whole panel or just a specific question to one of the panelists.
Hi. I had a question about this wall in the sea in Venice, because in the past I've been with discussions with the local governments, and it was actually in those discussions a big problem to block even only a few meters of a waterway. And I was really curious if you've also experienced resistance with this concerning shipping, for example. That was the biggest problems most of the time, and how you overcame this for an environmental purpose.
Yes, the solution that has been selected for defending Venice, in principle, allows to maintain both the environment and the economy. And this is the tricky thing. That is why it is complicated, because we want everything to be maintained. And so in the Mose, the barriers have some locks which can allow the ships to pass through even when they are raised up. Lower, but they can, like with the locks. Because the port is inside Venice. So inside, not inside, it was inside the historical city. It has been moved on the border of the lagoon, but it's still there. It's still there because it's connected to of course, as any port, to the railway, and we are close to the airport. So the economy of the city depends on the activity of the port. And the passenger ships, which was raised as a big issue, of course, they have a very big impact. Today, they are not passing through anymore. You see there are 3 inlets. In my picture, there were 3 inlets. The passenger ships, they pass in the inlet closer to Venice. Now it's not possible anymore. They will pass only through the second, a bit southern, the middle inlet, where it's connected to the commercial port. There is only a problem of connecting commercial and passenger traffic to go, but this is the solution which has been chosen. Again, you have to maintain economic life and environment. With the present situation, we maintain both of them. It's a win-win situation for both the economy and the cultural heritage and the environment.
Okay, anyone else?
Am I going? Another question about Venice. So the discussions about these lagoon walls started, I mean, it's as old as I am, to be honest. So if we project how long it took to go from the initial discussions out to when, it's now functional, starting in 2020 when it was first lifted, that takes us past 2050. If you were to start this project again, having done it once, how long do you think it would take from, construction started in the early 2000s or something? So how much do we reduce that 17 years?
I mean, the point is the community involvement, as it was said before. The decision, it's not I mean, to build it was not so long. It's the discussion which were very long, and to find also the correct governance mechanisms. I mean, in principle, this kind of solution has been, should have been ready 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, maybe, if we were faster. The point is a very long discussion. Again, also this is an experience, because it's not a problem of left wing or right wing in the government, because we passed through all of them. And in any moment of our political life in the last 50 years, there was a contribution. Of course, there was a we learn also, we should have learned, I think we should have learned about also the communication and the participation processes that are needed, because at the end, the solution is a solution which must be done in a democracy, so in a society taking care of the different opinions. We have a fisherman, we have tourism, we have a port, we have cultural heritage, everything is inside. So that is the main difficulty. That's why I think it is better to start the discussion now. We are starting, in some sense. The academy is starting presently. Then I hope that this kind of discussion can be also involved the political community, which normally have a shorter site, but we started, we are doing this with this discussion, and if you do not start, you don't know when you will finish, of course.
Thanks. I'm sorry, I have another question about Venice.
I'm sorry, but for my colleagues.
So the perception, the population, the Venetians themselves, and their relationship with sea level and flooding, it's an interesting population to study, people's adaptation to sea level rise. And I just wondered, how do people, people leave Venice over time? I mean, is it a declining population? It's not growing because it's sort of constrained. Yeah, I just wondered if you could talk more about how people perceive sea level rise and their future, right? Like, I mean, how is there a point at which Venice can't be maintained?
Thank you for your question. It is quite complex to answer because it's not only a problem of sea level rise. It is a problem of, it's a problem of sustainable economy inside. Okay. With the flooding, nothing can be sustainable. If you are flooded, there is no economy of any kind. Today, we have one of the main resource of the city is tourism. As you know, I believe, we have a problem of over-tourism, because the real risk today is to stop the flooding from tourists, and which is because the monoculture, like in Norwegian, if you have only oil, the Norwegian is risky to have once only source of economy. Forest is risky for a state, is even more risky for a city. So the main risk is to lose the citizenship, because if all the inhabitants will be only tourism, we will be waiters and which is a good work, but and cookers. That's we would like to avoid this. So the real challenge is to carry sustainable activity inside the city, which can allow scientists to live. We would like to. We have a university, and we would like to double the number of students, which means to double the number of laboratories. This will be a part of a new activity, more sustainable, which can be carried also in the system of Venice, not only in the central city, but to carry new people, to carry new residents. But also in the history, this happened. We imported the people from elsewhere because it was always a difficult city to live in. I would say today we learn that the quality of life today is very good. We have a fiber optic. It is a modern city inside. You can work from anywhere, we learned during the COVID, but also from Venice. So if you wish to come in Venice, you were very welcome. You will renovate, we have to renovate the social base of Venice. So in the past, there were people which went out of the ground floor because it was not possible to live. and surely. So it was a problem. Today is not that we fix that problem, the people will be back soon, because we have to, the policy is to enlarge the opportunity of being, what we would like to underline is that we do not want to become Disneyland, but this will happen. Like the sea level will rise, Venice will become, if we do nothing, the do nothing option is that in 20 years we will be a thematic park, and I will buy a Pluto and Paperino costume and stay with that but this is something, is my nightmare today, but we are trying hard to avoid this.
Yes, and maybe to one of the other panel members, if possible.
Sorry.
Just to share it around. No, really fascinating, but...
Yeah, I would like to open up the discussion to a bit more of that worldwide issue called sea level rise, because the measures that you've discussed and implemented in Venice are obviously not implementable all worldwide, both for geographical reasons, but also for financial reasons. And I wonder to all of the panel members if there are both recommendations you have in terms of communication strategies, how to address these difficulties when it comes to these injustices, and in terms of tangible action, what you recommend to these other regions and how to deal with that on a community level.
So who would like to tackle that one first?
I can start. So actually a case study, I've been doing a lot of work along, so the NASA Sea Level Change Team is the team I lead. We've been doing a lot of work alongside the United Nations working in Tuvalu. It's an island in the Pacific that's very threatened by sea level rise. The discussions there around climate mobility, so giving people the option to travel elsewhere to make a livelihood, trying to adapt is a very difficult thing there. It's a very poor country, so there is adaptation underway, but I think one thing we can do, I recently traveled to Tuvalu, working with the UN, meeting with their government, meeting with local people there. I think having that direct interface, building some trust, there's still a mistrust of the science that is telling them that they will ultimately need to adapt or to relocate. Their government understands that, the local populations do not. So it was a big step for their leaders to invite NASA scientists in to come meet with them, and in a very careful way we started to open a discussion. But it's an ongoing process, and it's not a simple one. I'm not really giving you a solution here other than I think engagement and then trying to build that trust is critical before you start talking about solutions.
Roderick, Valerie?
Okay, so I have two types of experiences. The first one is that at the international level, during meetings associated with the release of the IPCC report with like parliament members or community members, in particular from small island developing states. And what I heard from that perspective was the challenge of, even if funding was allocated by the Green Fund, the money spent for consultancy and the challenge in between the wish to have a project and the actual implementation, quite similar to what happens in Venice, but not due to local deliberation, due to the slow process to transform funding into a viable, tested project, even before looking at local acceptance of the project. So this comes up very strongly as a major gap to make choices possible and implementation feasible within 10, 20 years. And my second experience with local communities and local and national policy members in France is the challenge of overcoming denial. Denial is very, very powerful when you live in areas that are today not completely touched. Maybe you have the first signs, but you understand that where you live, your economy, your livelihoods, your way of managing a city will have to change. It creates a lot of fear for having to carry change and having to go against powerful interests of keeping the same decision-making process, in particular with the building sector. So the only way I identified to overcome denial is to create different ways of deliberation where you play a game and you play a role by, let's say, 2050, so that you get out of today's roles which stick you to opposition for any change, including younger generations, and sort of serious games, scenario playing, in a different way to engage local policymakers, local stakeholders, local communities, so that they understand what it takes to continue to live by 2050 with higher sea level rise, to try to find ways to agree on what can be the best compromise, including planned relocation, which is part of the hard compromise, and then build back what has to be done now to make it possible to have avoided risks at acceptable costs by one generation, basically. So I think we don't use enough these tools to make 2050 a reality and get out of the power relationships that are obstacles for action, as you identified, through methods of allowing people to overcome denial.
Roderick, would you like to say something?
Well, I'm not sure whether I have to add a lot to this, but it's clear that this is a much wider problem than just the sea level. And I think in the answer you heard from Valerie, I think she said twice sea level, but this is, of course, for all climate change issues the case. And it's touching upon one of the biggest issues, of course. I mean, if I look to the room, I think it was said also in the presentation by Valerie, nobody is probably part of this orange people in the plot Valerie showed. And so how do we transfer knowledge and action to the global south? It's an enormous problem, and maybe the biggest.
I have a little bit of a follow-up question to that. And usually when we think about the pillars of science usability, the first is credibility. So do we believe the projections? And I think the first 3 days of this workshop really focused on that. The second is saliency. Is it actually relevant to the communities? And I think we started to address that today and yesterday. Local projections, the timescales are important. The third element is legitimacy, which asks about the process and who is involved in the process. And so my question to the panelists and actually this entire community is, the community that is making projections, the practitioners that we're working on, are not representative of the global south. We've talked about that now. We have not included indigenous communities who are also not part of the UN framework. And so to improve the legitimacy, which is ultimately what we need to do to improve the usability of the projections, we need to broaden the community. We need to talk to practitioners who are perhaps outside of the wealthier communities that are forefront in making adaptation decisions, and to some of those that have less resources. My question is, and it's a challenge for all of us, how do we do that?
Who would
I'm
like?
going to provide the answer to that. No, yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I think it's a very fair question. I did use the example of Tuvalu. So right now we're engaged working with the Department of State in the U.S. and the United Nations, trying to support island nations in the Pacific and to understand what they need. Coordination there is very challenging, right? So, I mean, what might be a fit for one island nation is not a fit for the other. Getting to these areas are very difficult. So I mentioned traveling to Tuvalu. That's not something that can be done often, right, to go work with those communities there. There are very active organizations in the Pacific. So SPREP is one. I'm not going to remember it's an acronym. I'm not going to remember what it stands for. There's the Pacific Community there as well, a group of scientists based out of Fiji. They're discussing very similar things to what we're talking about here. There are opportunities to engage with them, and I think we're starting to do that in some areas, but I think exactly what Jeremy says, there's a need to broaden and to really try to do that in a more detailed way.
So we can let them finish that.
Yeah, if I may add a few more points to that. What we are talking about is basically social learning, including capacity building, but not just that. So there are aspects of social learning that call for innovative, in particular, educational approaches. Initiatives such as ocean schools, where you create relationship to tight gauges, information. You allow young people to understand the production of knowledge so that they have ownership of knowledge and can be ambassadors. That's a powerful tool which starts to be explored. And the other dimension, which is very powerful, is creating communities of action so that it's a collective process, and science is clearly not enough. Initiatives that pick up art, cultural dimensions. I know cities that have created sea level rise festivals with visitors from other cities facing the same challenges, playing with humor, self-changing their own identity, which is not just living by the coast, but transforming how to live by the coast, including by moving away. These are part of the deep social learning processes which go far away from my own physics background, but are critical for these transformations that we are calling for, not just the hard infrastructure, but the multiple changes that will be needed in many places. And work from economists highlights that migration away from coasts and planned relocation are cost-effective options, but they are very hard to be attractive because of grounding into local context for many communities.
I have a question for whoever wants to take it. I can imagine that in a lot of places risks are dominated more by extreme events, maybe both in amplitude and uncertainty. Is that the case? There are places where projections are of some importance, but most of the uncertainty will come from extreme events, and how to combine those then, the uncertainty of the projections and the extreme events?
Well, of course, the risk in the end is caused by the extreme event and not by the change in the mean trend. But the extremes are changing because of the mean. And that is, in fact, calculated and captured reasonably well based on hydrodynamical models. But the issue is a little bit that the variability itself may also change over time. And we are very good in climate models to estimate the mean energy content of the system, but we're not very good in addressing variability in the system. And therefore, that reason, we add up usually the existing variability to the change in the trend. And that's a shortcoming. We have to address also the change in the variability in future work, but I think models are not really, well, GCMs are at least not known to be good in variability, but even hydrodynamical models suffer whether they can represent that correctly. So there is an issue there, but it will take a long time before that is solved, I think.
Can I just, I'm going to ask a question because I can, and we're running out of time, but I did want to put this question particularly to the more physically based people on the panel. Roderick, you've talked about the need to, duck now, you've talked about the need to deal with deep uncertainty, and that potentially could be something this community should focus on, and we've been talking about this week in sea level projections. What would be the most, and this is to anyone on the panel, but what would be the most urgent, highest priority physics, science focus for us? Anyone? May I answer, because I have a physics to back it up? Sorry. No, it is 23 years that I am director of Corilla, which have represented many disciplines. So I started from multidisciplinary approach, okay? Then I understood that there is a need of interdisciplinary approach. Now I'm convinced that we are to pass through transdisciplinary. There is a lot of science that need, which means a revolution in our educational system. So there are something, in order to cope with the uncertainties that more or less everybody spoke about during this session, we have to look into new knowledge. Maybe our education we are being made is not enough. There are some other disciplines that should come, the holistic approach that now we listen, should really in science
try to develop something new. We are thinking in Venice to have new courses of university concerning the water cycle, because it's not only salt water, fresh water, normally divided in the engineering. There is no more only hard science and social science, no? They are together. Maybe that what we need today, for solving the problem of the future, there will need really some this transdisciplinary approach of thinking out of the box. That it is the real target and the real challenge for us scientists.
Valerie?
What I found most missing for the AR6 assessment was broad community approaches on how to agree on methodologies to assess whether, for instance, a threshold has been passed for Antarctic instability processes, whether related to ice shelves, observed thinning, or other dimensions. And when there's no agreement, no agreed, at least basic ways to discern it from observations and existing models, it's very hard to communicate the state of knowledge. It's very hard to assess it as well. So working carefully on, what would you agree on observational aspects or modeling frameworks, including fitness for purpose to be used, I think that would be already an advance in addressing some of these aspects and be prepared for surprises that will come from what's taking place in the real world.
We'll go along. Ben?
Yeah. Valerie stole my answer, at least part of it. Okay. No, I mean, I think this identification of thresholds and the use of observations alongside the projections, I think, is really critical. There's this constant request from practitioners, well, which scenario do we choose, right? And that's going to change over time as science continues to advance. So being able to provide that information as we go forward, I think, is really important. I will also just note that terms like deep uncertainty, low confidence, ambiguity, those are just not transferable to practitioners right now, right? There needs to be a better understanding of what those mean. And to say that they're of unknown likelihood, again, we understand what that means, I think, within this room, but that doesn't make sense to practitioners and end users. So finding better ways to communicate these difficult processes, I think, is really important as we move forward.
Yeah.
I was going to go to Roderick, but Valerie...
Yeah, I have one more point to say. When you teach, when you explain the state of knowledge, when you build climate literacy, you try to have the big picture. But when you write on press releases from your own research pieces, sometimes it doesn't help, because the sort of dramatic tone associated with advances in one or another direction from one another line of evidence sometimes can feed denial discourses or can create a lot of anxiety, what you get from the communication about instability possibilities. So I think we have a responsibility as scientists when we release to the media outcomes of important advances to help the audience understand how it fits in the big picture, in a sort of help them understand what really it means and not just the headlines. Otherwise, it's creating confusion.
And Roderick, the final word is yours.
Yeah,
I'm worried about that, but we'll give it to you.
You're recorded.
Big silence. Well, I think I would also like to add some positive things in here again. I think I did that yesterday as well. As a cryospheric community, we're making progress. I mean, if you consider how the cryospheric community was organized at, say, the time of AR5, it's not that long ago. It's 10 years ago. I still recall. Maybe not everybody here, but things changed. We have ISMIP in the meantime, and they address a lot of questions. So the community voice from the cryosphere towards the sea level, it's improved. I don't think it's there. There is still a lot of people who like to stay in their cryospheric issues and not concerned with sea level and the other way around. But we are bridging. And this bridging effect is, in fact, also where Pierluigi, I think, is focusing on. We have to step over borders between well, you immediately make it transdisciplinary, but I think also on the interdisciplinary, we have to talk to people who are close to our field, but they do slightly different things. And we have to inform them, but also try to learn from them. And I think in the cryosphere sea level discussion, this is improving. There's still room for improvement, but I think we can address the deep uncertainty in a much better way in 5 years from now than that we do. We can define better what we know and what we don't know, and we can make a split in the timing, for instance, of the problem. Now we only consider process, but it may well be that we don't have any deep uncertainty until 2100 anymore in 5 years from now, but still having deep uncertainty on the longer time scales. This may be already a step to narrow down what we still don't know and also steer the direction. In the end, I mean, getting rid of deep uncertainty is improving our physical understanding from a physical point of view at least. But we have to be, the first step is to constrain better what is deep uncertainty, where in the system is the deep uncertainty and where not. Can that be depending on scenario, can it be depending on timing? I think we can be much more precise on that, and that will be very helpful, and that will in the end reduce this ridiculous 2 to 15 meters possibly to something which is just a few meters of uncertainty in 2300. And that's the kind of steps I think which are feasible to be made.
Well, good to go with the speaker. Well, thanks very much, panel. I could see you writing, Valerie. I knew you had something else you wanted to say, but we do need to close it down. So I think it's just been a wonderful session. I want to thank you for your insight and facilitating this discussion. So a round of applause, please, for the speakers.
Just to say two things. So I was very sleepy this morning, so so we will reconvene at 11:45 now, okay? And we will delay everything by quarter of hour. And I mean, lunchtime will be so 1:15, and so we will have the picture, the group photo in the entrance outside of this room, like at 2 o'clock or something. We'll ring the bell anyway.
Okay, see you back 1:45, and those speaking in the next session, there's only 3 of you,